April 1943. Mid-Atlantic Convoy. A grain ship loaded with wheat spotted a Focke-Wulf Condor maritime patrol aircraft searching for convoy position to report to U-boat wolf packs. 4 Fairey Swordfish biplane torpedo bombers lifted off from the ship's deck. The deck was 420 feet long, built directly over the cargo holds. Below the flight deck, 8,000 tons of wheat remained stored. The German aircraft fled. The convoy position remained unreported. The vessel was not an aircraft carrier. It was a merchant ship, civilian-owned, civilian-crewed, carrying paying cargo. It happened to have a flight deck and 4 combat aircraft. This was a merchant aircraft carrier, designated MAC ship. 19 of these vessels operated between 1943 and 1945. They flew 4,177 combat sorties. Not one merchant ship was lost to U-boat attack in convoys they escorted. Aircraft carriers were warships. Purpose-built, expensive. Merchant ships carried cargo. MAC ships combined both functions, simultaneously grain carriers making commercial runs and escort carriers defending convoys. Neither role was optimized. Both roles functioned. This is the story of British unconventional warfare at peak efficiency. The story of solving the escort carrier shortage by converting what was already at sea. The story of achieving air cover without building warships. The story of merchant seamen and naval aviators operating the same vessel under separate chains of command. MAC ships proved that adequate capability, deployed practically, achieved strategic effect that perfect solutions, unavailable in required numbers, could not. The specifications were bizarre. The operational record was undeniable. The cost effectiveness was dramatic. MAC ships worked because British naval architects understood that convoy defense required aircraft, not perfect carriers. The convoy crisis of 1942 created the requirement. German U-boats operated in wolf packs, concentrating against Atlantic convoys. The mid-Atlantic gap, the area beyond land-based aircraft range, was where U-boats attacked with impunity. Convoys crossing this gap had no air cover. Surface escorts alone could not stop wolfpack attacks. Destroyers drove submarines underwater, but could not prevent them from shadowing convoys. U-boats surfaced at night, tracked convoys, radioed positions, and assembled for mass attacks. The answer was air cover. Aircraft forced U-boats to submerge, disrupting coordination. Land-based aircraft could not cover the mid-Atlantic gap. Very long-range liberators left a gap approximately 800 miles wide. U-boats concentrated operations there. Escort carriers could provide the air cover, but Britain had approximately 20 by mid-1943. Each cost approximately £1 million and required 12 to 18 months to build. The Royal Navy needed carriers for multiple theaters. The Atlantic alone required 30 carriers minimum. The numbers did not work. 30 escort carriers at £1 million, each was £30 million Britain could not afford in the required time frame. Alternative solutions had limitations. CAM ships, catapult-armed merchantmen, carried 1 Hurricane fighter launched by catapult. The concept provided single-sortie air defense. Once launched, the Hurricane could not land back. The pilot either reached land, ditched near a ship, or died. The moral cost was high. Operational capability was 1 sortie per transit. The British solution was MAC ships. Take existing merchant vessels, add flight decks over cargo holds, embark 4 aircraft and minimal support crew, continue operating as merchant ships while providing convoy air cover. The vessels remained civilian property, operated by merchant crews, carrying commercial cargo. The Royal Navy provided aircraft, pilots, and maintenance personnel. The concept exploited specific requirements. Grain ships and tankers had large open holds. A flight deck could be built over these holds without removing cargo capacity. The ships already operated North Atlantic convoy routes, carrying strategic cargo. The conversion specifications were minimal. Flight decks measured 400 to 460 feet in length. Width was approximately 62 feet. The deck was unarmored steel plate over a support structure welded to the merchant hull. No hangar was provided. Aircraft were parked on the open deck, exposed to weather. No catapult was installed. Aircraft launched using wind over deck, requiring the ship to steam into the wind at maximum speed. Aircraft capacity was 4 Fairey Swordfish biplane torpedo bombers. The Swordfish was obsolete by 1943 but available, could operate from short decks, and was effective for anti-submarine patrol. Maximum speed was 138 miles per hour. Range was 546 miles. 4 aircraft was the minimum for effective operations. 1 on patrol, 1 preparing for launch, 1 in maintenance, 1 in reserve. The crew arrangement was unique. The merchant crew operated the ship normally under the merchant captain's authority. The Fleet Air Arm Detachment consisted of 4 pilots, approximately 12 maintenance ratings, and 1 officer. The FAA personnel operated under naval discipline. The merchant captain retained authority over ship operations. 2 separate chains of command existed on 1 hull. Conversion costs were the critical advantage. Converting a grain ship or tanker to Massey configuration cost approximately £90,000. This included flight deck construction, reinforcement work, aircraft handling equipment, basic maintenance facilities, and communication equipment. Compared to escort carrier costs, building a new attacker-class escort carrier cost approximately £1 million. Converting a merchant hull to a full escort carrier with hangar, catapult, arrest door gear, and expanded facilities cost approximately £600,000. For the cost of 1 escort carrier, Britain could convert 11 MAC ships. For the cost of 1 merchant hull converted to full escort carrier, Britain could convert 6 MAC ships. The capability per pound sterling spent was dramatically superior. MAC ships provided air coverage at fraction of the cost, and they continued generating revenue by carrying cargo. 19 merchant vessels received MAC conversion. Grain ships converted included Empire McAlpine, Empire McAndrew, Empire McCallum, Empire McDermott, and Empire McKendrick. These were Empire-type merchant ships of approximately 8,000 tons dead weight, built to standard designs for government service. Each was converted while under construction or shortly after completion. Tanker conversions included Acavis, Adula, Alexia, Amastra, Anzylus, Gadala, Macoma, Miralda, Rapana, and others. These tankers displaced 8,000 to 12,000 tons dead weight and continued carrying oil cargo while operating aircraft. The tanker conversions required additional safety measures due to fire risk from aviation fuel and cargo oil in close proximity. Before we detail the combat record, if you're finding this analysis of unconventional British naval innovation useful, subscribing helps the channel and ensures you don't miss similar deep dives into Royal Navy ingenuity. The operational record began in May 1943 when Empire McAlpine joined Convoy ONS-5, a westbound slow convoy departing Liverpool. This was MAC ship operational debut. The convoy encountered U-boat Wolfpack. Empire McAlpine Swordfish aircraft flew anti-submarine patrols, forcing U-boats to submerge and disrupting attack coordination. The convoy lost ships, but the presence of air cover prevented more catastrophic losses. The pattern established immediately. MAC ships operated as convoy Commodore ships or positioned centrally in convoy formation. When aircraft launched, the MAC ship increased speed and turned into the wind while other convoy vessels maintained course. The aircraft launched, the MAC ship returned to convoy speed and course. When aircraft returned, the process repeated for landing. Convoy operations continued with minimal disruption. Flight operations in North Atlantic conditions tested crews severely. Launching required 12 to 15 knots of natural wind, plus ship speed to generate 30 knots relative wind over deck. In calm conditions, the ship steamed at maximum speed, approximately 12 knots for grain ships and tankers, to generate sufficient wind. In rough seas, landing was hazardous. Swordfish approached at 60 knots, touched down on a 400-foot deck, pitching in Atlantic swells, and snagged arrestor wires with limited margin for error. Weather limited operations frequently. North Atlantic storms made flight operations impossible. Ice accumulation in winter forced aircraft storage below, when possible, or secure lashing on deck. Maintenance in open deck conditions was challenging. Engines required warm-up in freezing conditions. Salt spray corroded everything. Fabric wing surfaces needed constant inspection. Despite these challenges, MAC ships maintained operational aircraft availability rates comparable to escort carriers. The tactical employment focused on U-boat suppression rather than kills. MAC aircraft patrolled ahead and flanks of Convoy, searching for surfaced U-boats, attempting to establish shadowing positions. When a U-boat was sighted, the aircraft attacked with depth charges or marked position for surface escorts to engage. The primary goal was forcing submarines underwater, disrupting wolfpack coordination, preventing position reports to other boats. The statistics validated the concept. MAC ships flew 4,177 combat sorties between May 1943 and May 1945. Thou escorted hundreds of convoys across the Atlantic. Not one merchant ship was lost to U-boat attack in convoys escorted by MAC ships. This statistic requires context. Some convoys had both MAC ships and escort carriers. Some had MAC ships and very long-range aircraft coverage for part of the route. The statistic does not claim MAC ships alone prevented all losses. It demonstrates that convoys with MAC ship air cover had dramatically better survival rates than convoys without air cover. Specific engagements illustrated effectiveness. In July 1943, Empire Mackay's aircraft detected U-boat on surface ahead of Convoy. The Swordfish attacked, forcing the submarine to crash dive and abandon shadowing. In September 1943, Rapana's aircraft sighted U-boat Wolfpack forming for night attack. The position report enabled escorts to engage the concentration before attack developed. In November 1943, Adula's aircraft drove off German reconnaissance. Aircraft attempting to locate Convoy. The U-boat perspective revealed MAC ship impact. German U-boat logs recorded increasing difficulty maintaining surface shadowing positions after mid-1943. Aircraft forced submarines to submerge for hours, losing convoy contact and preventing coordination. U-boat commanders noted that convoys previously without air cover now had continuous aircraft patrols. The operational change coincided with MAC ship deployment. Comparative analysis shows MAC ships occupied unique position. CAM ships provided single sortie capability with high pilot loss. Approximately 8 CAM ships deployed, flying 9 sorties, shooting down 6 German aircraft with multiple pilot deaths. The concept was abandoned once alternatives became available. Escort carriers provided full capability, hangar space, catapults, advanced maintenance, crew of 700 naval personnel. These cost £1 million. They served with fleet forces, provided fighter, coverage for major operations, and operated in multiple theaters. MAC ships provided minimal capability. 4 aircraft, no hangar, no catapult, merchant crew with small FAA detachment, limited speed. These cost £90,000 and required minimal conversion work. They operated on cargo routes and served exclusively in Atlantic convoy escort. The strategic calculation favored MAC ships for convoy work. 11 MAC ships provided 44 aircraft coverage for the cost of 1 escort carrier, providing 8 to 12 aircraft. 19 MAC ships provided 76 aircraft for the cost of 2 escort carriers. The aircraft numbers were comparable. The cost difference was dramatic. The operational mathematics confirmed advantage. The Atlantic required continuous air coverage for multiple convoy routes simultaneously. If 30 convoys were at sea simultaneously, requiring 1 carrier or MAC ship per convoy, the choice was between 30 escort carriers at £30 million or 30 MAC ships at £2.7 million. Both provided basic air coverage. The cost difference was £27.3 million. The practical advantage was availability. Converting a grain ship to MAC configuration required 4 to 6 months. Building an escort carrier required 12 to 18 months. When the Battle of the Atlantic reached crisis in spring 1943, MAC ships provided capability in 1943. Escort carriers would provide capability in 1944 or later. Time pressure favored rapid deployment of adequate capability over delayed deployment of superior capability. German destroyer and cruiser doctrine differed fundamentally. The Kriegsmarine built powerful individual ships optimized for capability. The Royal Navy built adequate ships optimized for numbers and availability. MAC ships exemplified British doctrine. They were not impressive vessels. They were available vessels that worked. the unconventional, aspects extended beyond specifications. Fleet Air Arm pilots operated from merchant ships, living with merchant crews, working under mixed command structures. Merchant captains coordinated with naval officers on air operations while maintaining commercial sailing schedules. Cargo handling occurred around flight deck operations. Loading grain while launching aircraft required coordination, no manual covered. The crew adaptation was remarkable. Merchant seamen, who signed on to transport grain, found themselves watching combat aircraft launch from their ship's deck. FAA pilots accustomed to naval discipline operated under merchant captain authority for ship matters. The potential for conflict was significant. The operational record shows cooperation functioned effectively. Post-war analysis validated MAC ship contribution to Battle of Atlantic victory. The deployment of MAC ships in mid-1943 coincided with dramatic reduction in convoy losses. Other factors contributed, including escort carrier deployment, very long-range aircraft, improved radar, Enigma decryption, and increased escort numbers. But MAC ships closed the mid-Atlantic gap air coverage at the critical moment. The concept influenced post-war auxiliary carrier development. The idea that merchant vessels could provide basic air capability informed Cold War auxiliary carrier planning. Helicopter carriers converted from merchant hulls followed similar logic. Container ships with flight deck modules explored the same concept. MAC ships proved mixed military-civilian operations were viable. The limitations were accepted openly. 4 aircraft provided minimal capability. No hangar meant weather exposure. No catapult meant launch limitations. Slow speed meant the ships could not operate with fast forces. These limitations were irrelevant because MAC ships were not designed for fleet action. They were designed for convoy escort. For that mission, the specifications were adequate. The strategic lesson was elegant. Not every mission requires optimal capability. Some missions require adequate capability deployed in sufficient numbers. MAC ships provided adequate convoy air cover. Building them in sufficient numbers to cover multiple convoy routes simultaneously achieved strategic effect. Building escort carriers in smaller numbers to provide superior capability on fewer routes would not have achieved equivalent effect. British naval architecture from 1939 to 1945 consistently demonstrated this understanding. Hunt-class escorts instead of fleet destroyers, corvettes instead of cruisers, MAC ships instead of escort carriers. Every case followed the same logic. Adequate capability deployed in numbers achieves more than excellent capability deployed rarely. The Royal Navy won the Battle of Atlantic because British doctrine matched resources to requirements rather than building ideal solutions Britain could not afford. MAC ships epitomized this doctrine. They were grain ships with flight decks. They were tankers carrying oil while launching torpedo bombers. They were civilian vessels operating combat aircraft. They were completely unconventional. They worked perfectly for their intended purpose. 19 MAC ships cost £1,710,000 total. They flew 4,177 combat sorties. Not one merchant ship was lost to U-boat attack in convoys they escorted. That is British naval efficiency. That is unconventional warfare. That is understanding that winning requires deploying what works, not building what is perfect. The Germans built powerful U-boats optimized for capability. The British built adequate escorts optimized for numbers. The Germans built capable surface raiders. The British built adequate convoy protection. German doctrine prioritized individual ship excellence. British doctrine prioritized operational coverage. The results demonstrated which approach worked in sustained maritime war. MAC ships represented the extreme expression of British pragmatic naval warfare. Take vessels already built. Add minimum modifications for additional capability. Deploy immediately. Achieve adequate effect at fraction of cost and time that perfect solutions would require. The approach was not impressive. It was effective. Effectiveness wins wars. Impressiveness does not. The convoy crisis ended. U-boat losses increased. Atlantic became survivable. MAC ships contributed to this outcome by providing air coverage when and where it was needed most, at cost Britain could afford. In time frame, the strategic situation required. That is what made them successful, not specifications, not impressive capability, not technical sophistication. Practical effectiveness deployed at scale. The Royal Navy operated grain ships with flight decks because grain ships were available and flight decks solved the problem. The logic was simple. The execution was unconventional. The result was 4,177 combat sorties and 0 convoy losses. British naval innovation worked because it focused on solving problems rather than building impressive solutions. Mac ships proved it. 19 merchant vessels that were simultaneously cargo carriers and aircraft carriers achieved strategic effect that hundreds of perfect escort carriers, unavailable in required time frame at acceptable cost, could not achieve. That is British naval excellence under resource constraints. That is why the Royal Navy won the Battle of the Atlantic.